Have you ever wondered why it says Made in Bangladesh on the label of your shirt? That's what we will be talking about today, which is globalization and trade. Globalization is when governments, companies, cultures, and people interact beyond their borders in trade and economies. For example, fashion trends spreading across the globe or fast food companies such as McDonald's are one of the most prominent examples of the impact of globalization. But today, we will talk about trade and how that affects globalization and how it connects to poverty. Instead, trade globalization makes the world increasingly interconnected with goods coming from all over the world. Companies perform an agreement called outsourcing, which is when they move their labor to countries with lower wages, which results in extremely cheap labor. To give you an idea of how cheap it is, it costs $82 a month to pay the salary of all the workers in an entire clothing factory in Bangladesh. This contributes to global poverty in many ways, and globalization has really helped with lifting people out of poverty. Due to globalization, the world's economies and cultures have become more interconnected, and free trade has driven the growth of many developing economies. The outsourcing of jobs gives people in poverty opportunities to make a living for themselves. As for companies, they have a huge reason to do this. According to economist Nicholas A. Poloroggi, he defines that the goal of globalization is to provide organizations a superior competitive advantage with lower operating costs to gain greater numbers of products, services, and consumers. So overall, both companies and those living in extreme poverty benefit from trade globalization and outsourcing, but only to a certain extent. The winners here are the companies that have to pay for cheap labor, as well as consumers who are buying cheap products. The main losers here are domestic high-wage workers who lose their jobs once their jobs are moved overseas by the company. However, what about the low-wage workers? Most workers are put in extremely hazardous conditions, and there are little to no regulation over the workers' safety in developing countries such as Bangladesh, Brazil, and China. However, the workers are at least making some money. At the end of the day, they are paid above average wages, but in developed countries, these wages are unacceptable. But another issue globalization and outsourcing creates is that the companies don't have to follow the same regulations as they do in developing countries. And with the absence of regulations, it's still very possible that the workers would be very mistreated. Plus, public awareness is growing, and with pressure from the international community, we could be able to help enforce these regulations. By 2018, it was reported that 68% of US consumer goods use outsourcing, which just puts into perspective how much globalization affects trade. In conclusion, globalization and trade have many advantages and disadvantages that are very difficult to weigh out. Although companies, economies, and those living in poverty benefit greatly from trade globalization, the working conditions are generally unsafe. However, these disadvantages can be solved, and trade globalization is progress to solving the many global issues we face, such as poverty. But it is progress that is difficult to digest.